Okay, in this video, I want to talk about some of the comparisons and connections between the poetry of Keats and Arthur Miller's Death of the Salesman. A lot of people regard this as a strange combination of texts for the tragedy paper. There's a bunch of different books that Solihull Sixth Form College could have chosen to use for um, the tragedy paper, and in the section C question, you need to deal with the two books which aren't Othello. So we chose to do Keats and Miller. Personally, I think they're a really interesting combination, and I'm quite keen on them as a pair of texts to work with in this question. And in this little video, I'm going to talk through a few reasons why I think there are interesting juxtapositions to be made, ways in which they're very different in significant ways, and perhaps where there are some surprising correspondences and parallels between the two books. Okay, so if we start with the obvious, if we start with genre, we're dealing with poetry and we're dealing with drama. Drama is the true home of tragedy. Okay, if we're speaking strictly, a tragedy has to be a play. So straight away, to talk about Keats's poems as tragedies is a little controversial. And not all critics are happy with that definition of them. Nonetheless, if we take the term tragedy in a fairly flexible way, clearly there are tragic things about Keats's poems. So that doesn't trouble me so much. I'm quite happy really with the idea of a tragic poem. But what might be significant about the difference between poetry and drama? Once we've noticed that, once we've observed that this is a poem, this is a play, we then get the question, so what? Okay, let me suggest one so what to you in terms of how the recipient's going to experience that. Let's talk about something obvious. Okay, a poem is going to normally be experienced privately and individually. Reading a poem is usually a very personal act, whereas drama is a theatrical form. And so, in its very essence, in its very nature, the experience of Death of a Salesman is a shared experience. It's a public event, a play. When we read the book, we're not receiving that play in its true force. So that's not what it's meant to be, right? That's the script, right? But what this is meant to be is a performed production, and I think that matters. Why do I think that matters? One reason is Keats is incredibly interested in personal, private, subjective experience. Okay, he takes us into the experience of an individual, and that's personal experience can be strange and surreal, and we can travel in our fantasy through poetry. And I think he's interested in isolated people. I think of the night alone and palely loitering in La Belle Dame sans Merci. Okay, there is a correspondence here between this idea of the heroic or the romantic individual experiencing life cut off, apart, alone, and his poetry kind of fits that because it's a poem and it's something that you internalize. One thing that I often find powerful about stories about Miller's early productions, when I've seen him interviewed and things like that, I've seen him talk about the premiere production of Death of a Salesman, and the first night it was shown. Nobody'd seen it before, and stage went black after the final lines of the play, and there was silence in the theatre. And Miller's sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, this is a failure." There's no reaction, and then you start to hear people sobbing in the audience in this darkened auditorium. All you can hear is people crying their hearts out, and then there is this silence and this shared grief for a long time, and then the place erupts into applause, and apparently that went on for 20 minutes, and it was just overwhelming. American drama had been transformed by this production. But I felt that there was something in that experience of collective grief, and that coming to a collective understanding of Willie and what his life meant, and of America, and the fact that it was shared mattered. That this is a play about a group of people that is meant to be understood by a group of people, and Miller wants his play to have a public and social impact. I mean, we can argue that Keats might do that as well, but I don't really see any evidence of that. I have evidence that Miller wants his play to have a public and social impact through the essay Tragedy and the Common Man, which you've read. And he thinks that tragedy can change the way that we see the world, and the way that together, as a community, as a collective, we shape our futures. So, there is this idea of the private and the public. I mean, both writers deal with both the private and the public, and we'll come back to that. But they are rooted in different ends of that. So Keats is rooted in this private experience of reading poetry, and Miller begins in the public experience of the theatre. So that's my opening shot with the genre. What else? If we think about endings, I think there is interesting ambiguity in the endings of both Miller as a playwright and in Keats. I mean, we all know that Eve of St Agnes, you've got this ambiguous ending because do they die in the storm or not? So that's obvious. I think there's more profound, interesting ambiguities in what does Lamia mean, and what does the death of Lamia mean? Is this the cold dead hand of logic squashing romantic love, or is this the elimination of evil by the light of Apollo, this Apollonian figure who realizes this threat and distinguishes it? And really, it's a complicated mixture of the two. So we get this kind of mixed, troubled, complicated reaction to the end of Lamia. We're heartbroken that Lysias's love has been lost. He's sort of been saved from the snake, but that saving has obviously gone terribly wrong because he's died at the moment of his salvation, which is deeply ironic. Okay, I kind of see similar ambiguities at the end of Death of a Salesman. You got this what happens next question, like with Eve of St Agnes, what happens next? What happens when they go into the storm? Well, what happens when Biff goes into the storm? What happens when Happy goes into the storm? I've got my guesses about what's going to happen, but that's left hanging. So in the jargon, that's called an open ending or an unresolved ending or lacking closure. Okay, and I think this is Miller's way of saying, okay, well, this story is going on. This isn't over. You're picking up this story now. You're sat around this grave, and now you're going to make decisions in your life about how you're going to respond to this. And we don't know, this could go either way. And I think Miller kind of gives that responsibility to the audience, which is quite interesting in terms of, what do we do with our lives? But then, so there's that, but there's also this idea of different interpretations, like in Lamia, we can interpret that differently. I think it is possible to interpret Willie differently, really, and Biff. Charlie pays respect to Willie's dreams. He says he was a salesman, he needed to dream, that was important. You can't denigrate that. There was value in that, okay? And I respect Charlie's point on that, a life without dreams and a life without self-belief is doomed, really. Tragic that those dreams didn't work out, but he respects those dreams. Biff doesn't respect the dreams. Biff says he had all the wrong dreams. I don't know whether Biff has the right dreams. He wants to be, the cowboy, the guy on the farm, but you can easily see that as a running away, as a failure, as a turning his back on life and an escape into the wilderness. So it could be seen as heroic individualism and finding something which is more authentic and real, or it could be seen as a running away from reality. I don't think there's an ultimate answer to that, and I think that ambiguity is one of the things which makes Death of a Salesman a worthwhile play. Because that's a hard question about our lives. To what extent should we follow our dreams? To what extent should we be sensible? When you're making your university choices, should you be following your passions and your dreams, or should you be doing the sensible thing? The thing that seems safe, the things that your parents want you to do. And that's the sort of dilemma which Death of a Salesman is engaging with, really. And they're hard questions. So yeah, that idea of ambiguity, I think, goes into both of them. Let's take topic 3, language, and specifically imagery. If you start off with the idea of language, in one useful sense, Keats and Miller could not be more different in their use of language. Think about where they go to in time for language. Now, you should know that Keats goes into the past for his language. He's drawing on medieval romance. He loves these old-fashioned words. He loves these obscure, half-dead words that he's found in old stories, old poems, old myths. And he loves to bring them back and create this strange and exotic world. So it's his mission, really, to create through language this sense of otherness, this fantasy world which is not our real world. And in one powerful way, Miller is doing exactly the opposite. Miller is trying to portray the reality of his present day for 1940, 47, 48, bang on that stage. So it's like his original audience are looking in a mirror. These are people that they've seen on the street in their lives, that they've met the day before, the week before. The language that they hear is unusually realistic. I think Miller is a master at capturing the rhythms and the nature of colloquial speech. It sounds real. So when Stanley the waiter in the restaurant talks about the chippies, he's using slang, denigrating slang of that time, of New York slang of the 40s, to talk about women, whereas you might talk about hoes these days. He's talking about chippies. That language seems a bit obscure now because slang changes, but that was bang up to date for Miller's time. Willie's going around calling Biff's teacher son of a bitch. The language is raw and crude, and it has this obscenity to it, which is very real and it's very unfiltered. It's not made pretty in the way that Keats makes language pretty. So that rawness versus Keats's poetic refinement, I think, is quite a useful difference if you're talking about AO2 for the section C questions. But here's the thing, that I think there's an unexpected similarity in one or two places. I'll give you an example of an unexpected similarity: nature imagery. Now, you should know, and you should be able to reel off some nature images from Keats. The classic is "the sedge has withered from the lake and no birds sing." Belle d'Ombre merci, very famous quotation in English literature. Well, I think there's an equivalent to that in Death of a Salesman. I don't know if anything occurs to you, a line which is similar. The line that I would pull out from Death of a Salesman, which kind of parallels that, is "the woods are burning. The woods are burning, boys. There's a blaze going on right now." Now, this is an image that Willie uses 2 or 3 times, "the woods are burning." And you've got the same idea of the destruction of nature, of the disintegration of nature, which is used in a very profound and deep way to signify tragedy, impending death, social collapse of relationships. So sedge has withered, woods are burning, is a powerful combination. So, and the words are simple that Willie says, "the woods are burning," but there's a deep poetry to it. And it's a clever bit of writing because it doesn't feel forced or fake, but at the same time it is poetry that Willie's speaking. Kind of a similar idea with the planting of carrots. There it becomes more of a visual image as we see this guy shuffling around planting the seeds into the earth. But again, you're back to this idea of nature imagery, this attempt to grow something good from the earth. Okay. Now, I don't know if you thought about other images from Keats, but you've got the intertwining of the blossoms in Isabella as an idea of romantic love. You've got the imagery of the nymph opening like a flower at the beginning of Lamia. Okay, so Keats, it's fairly easy to find that nature imagery, but it's there in Death of a Salesman as well. In the midst of this urban setting, this city setting, Miller's Willie's heart and mind is kind of pulled into nature and yearns for it. So he talks about the scent of the flowers and how that's gone at the beginning of the play, the way the landlord cut the tree down. There's strong images, strong echoes of the sedge withering from the lake there. And I think that's potentially usable in an answer. Okay. And then my final one, and I've kind of saved the best to last, I think, is what do you think's missing here? What is it? What's the theme or the technique or